Welcome to Iron Butterfly Podcast. My name is Megan Jaffer.
And I'm Katie Hopkins, and we'll be your hosts.
We created Iron Butterfly Podcast in honor of Eloise Page, the original Iron Butterfly. Our podcast continues her legacy, inviting the unsung heroines of the United States intelligence community to share their stories with aspiring leaders like you. So today's guest is another special FVEY episode.
Ooh.
Yeah. Lucy Ferguson is the Minister Counsellor for Foreign Security and Development Policy at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. She's held some incredible roles, including working for the British Foreign Secretary and serving as the UK's G20 YAC.
This is true.
We're going to have to talk about that. She describes herself as open, collaborative, joyful, and always up for a good laugh.
Those are really good adjectives.
Yes, like some of my favorites. Outside of work, she loves reading, yes, exploring art, and cheering on her kids as a proud soccer mom.
Oh.
And here's a fun fact, everyone out there.
Oh, okay.
She comes from a family of spies.
Oh.
But that's all she's allowed to say. So we're going to leave it at that.
And that's the first thing we're going to ask about.
So welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
We are thrilled to have you on Iron Butterfly. We were talking before we got started that our audience knows, because I think we've talked about it a lot, we have literally manifested having FVEY episodes, and we are in season 8, and we've had 2, and we're so excited to have you here. We can't wait to talk to you. But you know, we like to start kind of from the beginning because we want to get to know you, and we want to know, you know, where you came from and how you got into this crazy world of spies.
Okay. Well, okay. No, it's so lovely to be here. It really is. So where did I come from? Do you know what? There's a kind of 2 answers to that, because the amusing thing is that I was actually born here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, no way.
So despite my very British accent, I was actually an American citizen.
Wow.
So I was born in, I think it's now the hospital in Bethesda. It's changed names since when I was born, however many years ago it was. And we lived in Georgetown. And then I left DC when I was about 18 months old and firmly became a British citizen.
Just so we're clear.
As soon as she was back on home soil, she was like, I'm getting rid of that.
So it feels amazingly sort of circular somehow that life has brought me back here 40 years later. But despite having been born in the US, I actually grew up in the British countryside in the absolute middle of nowhere, on a sort of not quite farm, but pretty much with dogs and ponies and cats. And,
oh my God, Megan's going to have a lot of questions about that.
Sadly, we didn't have goats, actually. There were a couple of sheep at one point.
There you go.
Who were named after my mother's sisters, Susanna and Josephine. Very, very elaborate names.
Love it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. What did your mom's sisters say about the fact that the sheep were named after them?
I think it was a bit more traumatic when, let's say, the sheep came to a sticky ending that sort of appeared on our plates. And I think that's when they maybe didn't appreciate this.
I could understand that. That's reasonable.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
So I really was a country girl, you know, growing up. And we didn't travel the world that much. We did actually, there's a slight lie there, because there was a moment for about 2 years when we went to live in Belgium. And I think that was a really integral moment for me, because I think uplifting from my local school that was 28 children, farmers' children.
Oh, wow.
You know, not many of us really moved around that much. Then going and living in Belgium, this is all because my father was in the military. I think that just probably laid something in my brain about feeling confident about moving countries, actually. And just the fact then I went to a school there in Brussels, international school, children from all over the world.
Wow. So you were in the city in Belgium too.
And I remember just being staggered, you know, literally having only ever really hung out with British children, I think, probably. I was about 8 years old. Then being in a class, I think there was only one other Brit and me.
Oh, wow.
And people from all over the world.
Wow.
So I do think that probably had a bit of an effect on me. Went back to Britain after that and stayed in Britain. And then I went off to university and I read theology, believe it or not. And part of that was studying ancient Islam and then modern Islam. So when I was about 19, much to my parents' horror, they were amazing about this, really. I put on my backpack with 2 other friends from university, and we went backpacking around the Middle East. And I can't quite even remember what year this was, but certainly it was before the Syria that we've seen, recently. And we backpacked across Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and sort of back again.
Wow.
I think we were protected by our own naivety.
Yeah, I know. That's the best part of being that young and traveling.
Right? Yeah. And it just opened up my eyes completely. And it was the most phenomenal trip. So I suppose what I'm sort of saying is that these little moments that despite my very domestic country upbringing, it's just started to inject this interest in the international, the rest of the world, different cultures, different religions. I tried to learn some Arabic then as well. And I think that laid the seeds for then pursuing an international career thereafter.
I wonder, with your dad being in the military, if the other part of that is, kind of seeing and feeling please correct me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but seeing and feeling the importance of service.
That's interesting. Yeah, quite possibly. And actually, on the family of spies point, my grandfather was a spy, my great uncle was a spy, my uncle was a spy.
Oh my gosh.
And 2 women, actually, we can talk about more. So I wonder if there was that slight theme in the family of people who'd served their country, actually.
And you knew that when you were young?
Yeah, I did. The funny thing is that my grandfather was a spy, and my mum didn't know for many years until one day she was sitting at the top of the stairs and she heard him either answer the phone or sort of ring the phone, and he just said on the phone, "Over the wall." And it was referring to one of the Cambridge spies who just escaped prison by going over the wall. And she then saw it on the news. And that's when she started to go, what's
going on here?
My dad is either a psychic or a spy.
Exactly. So I think that was when she had her moment of beginning to work it out. But of course, it turned out that everyone else who lived on the street in London had already clocked this for years.
Wow, that's so interesting. And so at what point do you think you became interested in studying Islam? Do you think that was an artifact of your time abroad?
Yes.
Or what kind of was the English countryside girl going to college for? Was it to study religion, or how did you end up there?
That's a great question. And I didn't go to study religion as such. I went because I was so excited about going to university. I had a wonderful teacher who happened to be the religion teacher, who I think really helped me get into university. It was Oxford University. It was a wonderful university. And I didn't originally go to study Islam. I went to study, theology, Christianity, I suppose.
Interesting.
And I think it was probably that sort of trip to the Middle East that led to that. I can't quite remember exactly which one happened first, whether I started studying, but it was all kind of around the same time. But I tell you what, actually, talking to you as Americans, I genuinely think, this was also part of being the post 9/11 generation.
So
actually.
I was going to ask, I didn't want to call you out on the age, because
I think I already admitted I was born here 40 years ago.
We don't want to. So I wonder, so most American women in national security that come on the podcast that are of a certain age, I would say 99% of them went in, if they're of my generation, so I'm 46, of my generation went in because it was post 9/11. And so I was wondering if that was...
I think it probably was a factor. And I think, obviously, it wasn't an attack on home soil for us Brits like it was for you guys. So I think it probably had even more effect here. And actually, you're right, I've met a number of people since being here who say that was the reason that led them to public service, actually. And it was almost the day after they changed their jobs and, wanted to go and serve their country. But I do think it affected the likes of us in the UK. Obviously, we took part in missions with you in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So I think there was that sort of side of things going on. And I still remember vividly sitting in the common room at school when this started to happen on TV. And actually, I didn't really compute at the time exactly what was happening. But funnily enough, there was a diplomat's daughter in my class. And she immediately clocked the significance of it. And I always thought that was quite interesting that, that someone, I suppose, who probably had just traveled the world a bit more, had lived in Middle Eastern countries, grasped it a bit more quickly than the rest of us in terms of actually what some of the global significance of this was going to be. But yes, I think I probably would catch myself as being part of that post 9/11 generation. I think it probably was a factor, actually.
Wow.
So what are some moments from that trip in the Middle East that stick with you? Like, what do you remember from that trip?
Gosh, nothing that profound, probably. So when you ask that question, there are probably three things that immediately come to mind. There's probably many more moments, but in no particular order. One, there's this extraordinary scene. I think we were outside Luxor and there was a sort of horse race going on. And all the local men, and it was men, were riding these horses and carrying sticks. And the whole thing was a complete spectacle. And we were watching and taking photos. And then somehow, because I was a country girl and had been brought up riding horses, I found myself then riding one of these horses and racing along with them. And God, talk about exhilarating and just what an extraordinary experience. So that is something that has stayed with me. I think the other, have you ever been to Syria?
No.
There's a beautiful, beautiful part of Syria called Palmyra, which has these ruins that date, there are going to be lots of experts listening who will correct me, but sort of pre-Roman times and certainly around those times. And I remember being there at sunrise, no one else there at all, utterly beautiful ruins, just being able to walk amongst them, touch them. I mean, if I'd wanted to, you could have just picked up a stone and taken it home with you. You know, it was sort of extraordinary. So we're so used to these things being so protected and guarded and labelled, which actually is very important. And sadly, with what's happened to Syria since, I would have liked that to be more protected. But it felt an incredible, quite free and amazing moment of kind of connecting, I suppose, with the past, and just very beautiful as well.
Absolutely.
And I suppose the third, you know, just on the theme of politics, is the really interesting thing is this was Syria, and it wasn't that long probably before war, and it was Assad who was the dictator at the time, or the president. But yet somehow as backpackers, we never saw any of that. And we only saw the friendliness and hospitality of people.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, actually, gosh, this is, you know, Jews, Christians, Muslims, all living alongside one another in what seemed like harmony. And that was a really amazing thing to witness.
Totally. I feel like that's so important. I mean, always, but especially right now, of we just have this tendency to paint entire cultures and entire countries with a broad brush and to say, oh, that's an authoritarian country, so all these people must believe in that, or they must have these certain values or have this certain culture, and that's not the case.
Yeah,
like
there was
humans
a lovely
are
diversity
humans.
within the country. Yeah.
That's really amazing. So, okay, so you come back from the Middle East, you graduate from Oxford with a degree in religion. Then, like, what are you thinking you're going to do at that point
so
with
I'm
your
not going
degree?
to lie, but then when you've got a degree in a religion, unless you want to go into the church, it's quite hard to find a job. And I do remember putting my CV into, I don't know, oil companies, whatever it is, and they're like, what? So I had a year, I guess, where I did a few different bits and pieces. I think I was still working out exactly what I wanted to do, but I was still very much in the international space. So I worked for our sort of key international think tank in London that's called Chatham House. I mean, I wasn't paid anything. I was literally sleeping on friends' sofas. I then worked at a consultancy. I then went to Brussels and worked a bit in the Parliament. And then I went and did a master's at SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies. And that was in international relations, international law, and Arabic. So you can see there's a theme. And I think after that, what with a degree that says international relations on it, it was a bit easier to get a job. And that's when I moved into the British government. But I should say it's not all a complete success story. I tried at that stage to get into the Foreign Service, and I was rejected twice, I think, actually. Second time I got to the final round, and I just did a crap interview. I was, you know, sorry, am I probably not allowed to say that?
Oh, no. You can say whatever you want.
So I didn't get into the Foreign Service originally, which actually I think was quite good for me. But by this stage, I really needed a job and I didn't really have any money. So I did take a job in British government. And actually, I am very fond of the first job I had, but it wasn't quite where I had imagined myself. And I worked for the Intellectual Property Office and was sort of half based in the depths of Wales, which is about a 3-hour train journey from London. So I found myself sort of going to and fro London and Wales every week. But again, continuing the theme, much as people were lovely there, I knew it wasn't my thing. I managed to get into the one bit of sort of international work that existed on intellectual property, which was sort of a G8 as it was at that time, working group. And then from there managed to get a job in what's called our cabinet office, which is a bit like your National Security Council.
Okay.
And that's where the yak comes into it.
Oh, she left us on a cliffhanger.
I know. So where do we go?
Well, I have one question before you ask about the act. We'll keep our audience on the edge of their seat.
Okay.
So you mentioned that you had actually applied and been rejected from the Foreign Service a couple times. And I think we talked to a lot of young people or women specifically who kind of try and fail to get into the government. It's very difficult, right? But what I loved about what you said is that you thought it was good for you. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think, I went to a good school. I had a good education. I went to Oxford University. To some extent, life had treated me pretty well and had probably been fairly easy. I don't think I'd really had to meet with that much rejection or failure along that journey really at all. I was lucky. I was quick at school, all of that. So I think it's quite important for any of us to have a moment of rejection and failure. I think we learn from it. I think I learned from that. And I think it gave me experiences I wouldn't actually have had otherwise. I think it made me more grounded. And I actually think, not to get too into sort of career professional terms, but I think it has ended up giving me a slightly more interesting career in a way, because I didn't go into the Foreign Service originally. I did other jobs outside of that with different people, gained a broader experience of government. So I had all of that before I then did eventually find my way into the Foreign Service.
Can I ask probably a really naive question? But so when we talk about here, and I'm sure you know this, but when we talk about, so we talk about CIA and we talk about the State Department, most CIA people will say, I work for the State Department.
Sure.
So we all know here that when they say, I work for the State Department, we usually ask the real State Department or not. So how does that, do you guys have something similar?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That's all she can say about that.
No, it's fine. I just, when she's like Foreign Service, that's why I asked.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a good question. Okay, we got to talk about the yak.
The yak. Okay, so the yak. So the yak was actually a job title coined by Barack Obama.
Oh.
So people may not realize, but when you have these G20 and now G7 summits, you see the leaders all gather and there's lots of photos and they talk about the important issues of the day. Behind the scenes, of course, there's been a lot of work going on. And each one of those leaders will have someone called a Sherpa, who will Sherpa their way to the summit. There's a theme. And the Sherpa is normally a very, very senior representative in government who normally has the absolute trust of the head of that government. And so we'll do all the negotiations in the run-up. And then, of course, the Sherpa has to have someone who helps them. And we were called the Sherpa assistants. But it was Barack Obama who said, oh, you guys should be called the Yaks.
Oh, that's so good.
That's not where I thought it was going.
What did you think she was
I don't even want to. Well, when you said, well, behind the scenes, they have the meetings. And I thought you were going to say that Barack Obama thought it was like, oh, they're yakking it up in the background.
Maybe that too. Maybe that was the real reason.
Yeah, maybe.
No, yours is better.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I was the yak for our Sherpa, basically.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is a fun job when you're quite junior.
I'm sure.
And you get to go around the world with a kind of amazingly experienced negotiator and sit in the rooms that they sit in and meet people, like Barack Obama and that sort of thing. It was a very, very cool job, and I learned a lot from it.
I find negotiation fascinating.
I'm so glad you went there.
I find it so fascinating, and on different levels. I mean, negotiating with countries is a whole nother level of difficulty and complexity. But, as women, we tend to have a more difficult time with negotiating, just at the basic level. Like we talk about it all the time about negotiating our salaries or something. So to just talk about that experience of watching these high level diplomats negotiating like the world, basically.
Yeah, no pressure, right? Yeah. I think maybe what I learned is maybe why I love what I do actually is that how human it all is. And to be a really good negotiator, you really need to know who you are negotiating with. So as well as knowing the policy topic in hand, what makes the person on the other side of the table tick? What really sort of gets them up in the morning? What's going to make them stressed about this, or what's going to make them positive? So I think there was a huge human part to it all. And getting to know, G20 was a lot of people around that table. It's actually, it's really, that's hard. But the guy I worked for, he would spend a lot of time flying around the world to see each of those Sherpas individually, meeting them in person, picking up the phone to them on a really regular basis so that you've really built a relationship with people around the table. And I think that's so, so important. But also, of course, you have to know what's driving them, not just as people, but the politics that they're having to serve. Yeah. And I guess that's where we come into diplomacy, what might be, as they say, all politics is local. This is a hugely global gathering, but each person around that table will be having to defend or speak
their
to their local politics. Yeah. And I think that's where it's amazing seeing within our sort of foreign service how well connected that can be between sort of me and the Sherpa in the room. But let's say our ambassador in South Korea, who's able to say, actually, there's a big vote going on this tomorrow in the parliament, so they're going to be really motivated by X, Y, Z, and that helps you think about how you're going to position yourself on a certain issue in the room. So I think that human part has really stayed with me, and it's certainly what I'm learning. And the other thing is the skill in working a room and speaking to a room. So the guy I worked for, this great Sherpa, never wanted to be a civil servant originally. He wanted to be a theatre director, and he was trained in theatre.
You would be surprised how many people come on this podcast and were theatre majors.
In drama.
It is kind of a trend.
There's
it's
something
really
there.
Interesting, yeah.
Because watching the way he would use his voice when he would sort of be loud, but then when he'd go very quiet and everyone around the table would sort of lean in to listen, it was a real power.
It was an art.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I have to imagine the fact that you're saying that it's very human, I think honestly does surprise me in some ways, because when I think of a negotiation just between two people, like between two friends or spouses or something, you really are just negotiating with the person. But I think negotiating at a country scale, to me, I'm surprised to hear that it's so personal, because it feels like they're almost just a vehicle for something that's so much bigger than them. So it's interesting to hear you say that it is still very human.
Completely. And you're right, of course, they're a vehicle and it's professional and that sort of thing, but actually it's the personal relationships are completely key. They really are.
That's really cool. So take us through a couple other just highlights from your career. Like, what are some moments that you remember? It sounds like you moved. I mean, I think I've covered like a sliver, but you've moved between some really interesting jobs. Like, what are some of the ones that stand out in your mind as just being particularly memorable or purposeful?
Yeah. So, yes. After the yak years, probably maybe two in particular. One was working for our foreign secretary, which is your sort of Secretary of State equivalent. So Secretary Rubio right now. Which I was trying to work out how to talk about that job. It's seriously full on. And I remember at one point we traveled every single week, which was great, but it's quite something actually. And luckily this was the days pre-children. I was married, but my husband was in the Royal Navy, so he was away on his ship quite a lot. And I remember thinking actually that was quite fortunate, because I was traveling so much. We didn't have to deal with the guilt of not being home for dinner. But it's really amazing, I think, being so close to a politician like that, to someone who has that level of responsibility and power, the people that they meet with, the meetings that you are witnessing, you learn that sense of agency as well in terms of how you're guiding them and helping them navigate their way through difficult issues. And for us, and I don't know, this probably went down in different ways here in the US, but for us, the big political issue of the moment was Brexit. So we went on a big Brexit journey, and literally...
Wow, so you're in that job
I was
while
in that
Brexit
job
was unfolding. Wow.
as the Europe Private Secretary, as we're called, in the run-up to the referendum.
Wow.
And then sort of post the referendum. So in the run-up to the referendum, we travelled to every single EU member state on a sort of a bit of a campaign. And that was actually really extraordinary. This tiny, tiny little military plane. And sometimes we would do 3 countries in a day. I think I remember, I think I had breakfast in Algeria, lunch in Madrid, dinner in Paris. Quite cool.
That's
and in each one we were essentially would be meeting with the foreign minister, you know, conducting business and making our case, I suppose, at that stage for them to make a few changes so that we didn't have to leave the EU. But then Brexit itself was a moment I will never forget. It was a big day for us. And, you know, again, talking about mistakes, we the government thought that that the UK wouldn't vote to leave. So I went to bed that night, and the sort of team who were working through the night said, we'll call you about 4 a.m. if, you know, when we have, if the results are going in a different way. And we sort of went, yeah, sure. And then I got that call at 4 a.m. of sort of, Lucy, you should know that it does actually look like the government's going to lose this. And of course, then it was my job to be the first person to call the Foreign Secretary to say, Foreign Secretary, it looks like you're going to lose this vote, you know, wake him up. And then I think it was probably an hour or so later, he was the first British minister on the media doing the rounds.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And of course, at that stage, what could one really say?
Yeah.
But he was brilliant. It was a real example to me of kind of amazingly calm leadership, of just appearing very calm on screen and just sort of, you know, people have spoken, we'll listen to the results. And just being able, he spoke it was probably quite necessary leadership at that time. And that whole day, I both remember it really well, and it's a complete blur. But just full of phone calls, really, which is interesting, I guess, as a bit of an insight into how days like that can unfold. But for us in the Foreign Secretary's office, you can imagine you have all the EU foreign ministers on the line. I'm pretty sure I think it was John Kerry at the time, I'm pretty sure we spoke to him because everyone wants to know what's going on. But of course, you know, it was day zero. I mean, we didn't necessarily know what was going on. So that was an extraordinary sort of day. And then I remember standing next to that Foreign Secretary when David Cameron, who was our Prime Minister, resigned, just sort of a few feet away from us in number 10. And sort of we watched it together. And I thought, this is a moment I should make sure I don't forget, because it's a really important sort of political moment.
Yeah.
And then it was only really a few weeks later that the leadership changed, a new Prime Minister came in, and a new Foreign Minister was appointed. And of course, that Foreign Minister was someone who is a real character, and so many people know him, Boris Johnson. And the amazing thing about being a private secretary in a British Foreign Secretary's office is that we stay whoever comes in. And even if it's a change in political party, you still stay. So in the morning, we sort of said bye-bye to one Foreign Secretary, and then in the afternoon, another one walks in, and we stay at the same desk and we continue doing our job. But it's an amazing experience in navigating change. And, you know, again, humans and people, you have to really quickly work out who your new boss is, what makes them tick, how do they work. Everyone receives information in such different ways. And so you're rapidly trying to learn all of that, to sort of enable the whole system to deliver. So then I had a few months of that.
So many
Well, that was just one story.
I know.
We asked her for like 3.
I'm
and
aware.
that was just one.
I know, but I do have a follow-up question.
Do it.
Which is, I guess when this was happening, like, it sounds like you kind of went into task mode of like, okay, this event happened.
Yeah.
And this is what it means for me in my job. Like, I need to call all these people.
Yeah.
This is how my schedule will be now.
Yeah.
How, and maybe it wasn't this day that you felt it, but like, how did it feel for you? Having worked on that and having just traveled to all these European nations and being a part of that, like, and also, you know, being wrong. Like, how did that feel?
So the honest truth is, I didn't feel it straight away, because you're right, I went into task mode. So I just went into utter professional, right, this is what we need to do. And I don't think it took, I can't remember if it was that first evening or the next evening. It maybe took 2 days. And then I went for a walk in the local park. I sort of got myself out of the office. I went for a walk in the local park. And then I had a moment of, oh, wow, okay, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think I can have a tendency to get very professional about these things.
I think many of us can. Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember thinking in that moment in the park, thinking 2 things, actually. First of all, I thought, you know what, this is going to take a good 10 years before it's really sorted out. And I think that was probably about right. And secondly, thinking, and this maybe sounds too worthy or too cheesy, but a bit like we were saying with 9/11, actually, thinking, well, actually, this is a big deal. I had worked in Brussels at that stage. You know, actually, I feel really committed to now doing my bit to make the best of this and make this all work. So I think that was a kind of renewed moment of feeling committed to working in the British government, actually.
Wow.
That's really cool. Should we go on to story number 2?
Yeah, we have to. So give us another one.
Oh, gosh.
If you don't have another one, that's okay.
It's okay.
That first
No
one
pressure.
was really good.
There's another story about a plane journey with Boris Johnson where the plane broke down, but maybe I won't get into that one. So then, I suppose in jobs, I then had a wonderful job, which is the job I did before coming here, which was a deputy chief of mission in the British Embassy in The Hague in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
And have you ever been to the Netherlands?
No.
You should.
Oh,
go.
I have been to Amsterdam. Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes,
I mean,
went with
most
my
people
brother.
go to Amsterdam, which is very, very cool. But there is a lot to be said for getting out into the other little
I will say,
Dutch
when we
cities.
were landing in the Netherlands, it felt to me like a futuristic agricultural society. Like it looks
It's a great description,
simultaneously
yeah.
like super green and very agrarian, but also like not like super
Like advanced.
modern.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
advanced. Yeah.
That's another great description. You put it much better than I could have done. It's a very cool country, and I think it's one of those European countries. People rush to Italy and Spain and France on holiday. I'd highly recommend the Netherlands. And I promise it's not the Dutch government are not
Not a paid ad.
not paying. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of like the story there was not that was pandemic times. So this country that in many ways was it was pandemic and it was still Brexit times actually, because we hadn't really fully resolved things. So it wasn't an easy situation for a country that is a really old ally of the UK, really good friends. The Brits and the Dutch are very similar in temperament. But actually Brexit was causing us a lot of issues because, speaking a bit to what you were saying earlier, you know, in the end, these are 2 countries having to defend their own national interests. So there was politics there that was really hard. That became played out in the pandemic when there was a sort of fight for vaccines in a way. So that caused certain issues at points as well. So even in a country that one would think would be more straightforward diplomacy, we actually had some pretty sort of tricky moments to navigate. But it was a wonderful job and it has also changed my life. In fact, I didn't cycle here, but I now spend a lot of time cycling around because the Dutch cycle absolutely everywhere. So, I mean, oh God, I lost count of how many bikes we had at one point, and we bought most of those bikes here. Not quite all, but we have bought one that is, have you seen these cargo bikes? There's a big bucket in the front. So my 2 children sit in the front and we cycle around DC.
Oh my
in
gosh,
that.
that's
You
amazing.
have your wits around you.
I was going to say, it's a little
I
scary.
hope they're wearing helmets.
Yeah.
They're definitely wearing helmets. In the Netherlands, no one wears helmets, but here.
Yeah, it's a different
it's
level
true.
of.
Yeah.
So-
The drivers are not used to the
No.
to the bikers.
I've had a couple of moments actually.
Yeah.
So you have to have your wits about you. But anyway, it gave me a love of cycling and a love of getting about by bike.
Do you still ride horses?
Very infrequently now, sadly. It's a great question. I just haven't quite worked out how to have that in my life at the
Gotcha.
moment. They know they're expensive to look after.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm a diplomat. It's very transient. There have been known ambassadors who
Have
sounds a bit like
Wow.
it's something from the 19th century. You know?
they brought their equestrian
Rode on
Jake.
horse,
They sort of bought their horse. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So when did you come? When did you arrive here?
So I keep on saying 18 months, but actually it is a good sort of 20 22 months, nearly 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
2 years in August, which feels strange because I still feel quite new.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 years, I guess, is quite a long time. So I arrived here, very, very short notice. The job came up at really short notice. And I think we had about 6 weeks to turn ourselves around between the Netherlands and the US, which is quite a big deal when you're moving the entire family.
Mm-hmm. And how old are your kids?
They're 8 and 6 now.
Okay.
So they were what?
They were
6 and 4
toddlers.
then. So yeah, you are moving the entire family, but we absolutely love it. I have to say, haven't looked back. I mean, this job is full on. I guess I cover all of the world, really, be it Ukraine, be it the Middle East, be it China. So I arrived September 23 thinking China and Ukraine would be my 2 biggest foreign policy issues. And then 4 weeks later, the Hamas attacks happened. And that really dominated probably my first year here with work. And then, of course, we were hugely involved, I suppose, in sort of election, post-election inauguration. And now I'm really at the point of, I guess, in many ways I had to sort of start anew, actually, with a new administration. And that's always quite interesting as a diplomat, is sort of, it's felt like diplomacy 101, actually, of just having to completely reestablish relationships, relearn what their priorities are, what their focus is, what does that mean for us, how do we engage, how do we influence. So it's been professionally really, really fascinating having to sort of go back to the drawing board and ask all those questions.
Yeah, but I feel like all of the jobs leading up to this have kind of prepared you for that.
Totally. That was my job application.
Yeah. You've had plenty of practice. So this is going to be another naive American question. But when Megan was reading your bio, so we do the same thing here, you have a very long title. So I'm curious if you could take us through your title and explain what each of those things means.
Yeah. So it is... the title starts with Minister Counsellor, which is a slightly strange title, isn't it? So Counsellor is like advisor, right?
Okay.
And then the minister bit just makes me sound a bit more important.
Okay.
Because then in my team, I will have a few counsellors on different issues, and I'm the minister counsellor because I suppose I'm the boss.
Got it.
Running, working across all of those issues. So that's an attempt at explaining minister counsellor.
Okay.
I quite like it, actually.
Yeah.
And then sometimes there are, 5 minister counsellors in the embassy, maybe 6. We call ourselves the MCs.
Oh,
I love it.
I know, I love that too.
And then you're right. So I'm the Minister Counsellor for Foreign Security and Development. So policy. Foreign means we cover, essentially, there will be someone in my team who between them all will cover pretty much every part of the world.
Okay.
As I say, be that Ukraine, Middle East, India, Pakistan, China, and that means that, their work really is to engage with all the people in the US government who work on those issues. So if it's the person covering India, they know people who cover India in State Department, in National Security Council, but also crucially, not just within the administration, but on the Hill, across think tanks, who are the experts. And so much of their job is to be out and about as much as possible, meeting all these people, building relationships, but also just really trying to understand where the US may be on one of these sort of foreign policy issues or geographic parts of the world. In turn, communicate that back to London and explain that to London so that when London's making its decisions on foreign policy, it sort of understands, I suppose, how and where to work with the US. So that's my attempt at explaining the foreign part.
Yeah,
that's great.
No,
that's perfect.
Super helpful.
And security is sort of similar, but it's just more thematic security issues. Cyber, sanctions, data access, all these very important things. I'm not so good at some of this side of things, actually. I'm probably better at the foreign than the security. But actually genuinely and seriously, it is where the UK and the US are working together to not only keep our own countries secure and keep our people protected, but also where we work together across the world to sort of protect global security as well. So an amazing sort of group of people who work on that side of things. And then the third part of the title is development, which is the team of people who really work with the US. This has become a little bit more complicated recently. Work on development policy, and where the UK and the US work together to improve the lot of developing countries around the world, where we spend our money, how we're focused on global health, that side of things. So that is, there are lots of amazing people who are real experts on each of those three parts of the title, who will be working day in, day out with a broad suite of Americans as we try and essentially look at how the US and the UK can work together on all of those issues.
That's really cool. Do you feel like this job has changed the way that you see the US-UK relationship, or do you feel like you got bits of that in some of your other positions?
I think it has. I mean, I think it's better informed me, because in my other positions, aside from sort of my moments at the G8 with Barack Obama and the team, I hadn't done that much with the US, actually. So, and I know I'd always, we speak maybe too casually of this special relationship. But actually, I genuinely, and I remember sort of remarking on this 3 months into the job here, realised quite how special this relationship is. And it's not just because we share intelligence and we have a nuclear relationship and things like that. My observation is also that we do have a way of speaking to one another that I think is fairly unparalleled. And we can sit in a room and bash out ideas together.
Yeah.
And we are not too formal always, and share thoughts, share best practice, and really try and work together in how we deal with so many of the issues that I've sort of described. So I think it has made me realise that there is a special relationship, and it's deeper and broader than sometimes how it's
Described.
as well.
No, that's good to hear.
I guess that is
just gonna say
encouraging.
that,
I
yeah.
guess that is encouraging.
Yes.
Wow. Well,
encouraging.
that sounds like a big job. That's a
Yes.
lot.
It is a lot.
You're covering the whole world, all functions of the world, security and development. That's
Yeah.
pretty wild.
But this is where it is amazing people in my team, who do so much of it. But no, I'm not going to lie, it is a big job.
You're like, it is big.
Yeah. So what else, I guess, can you tell us about what you've enjoyed about like living here, or maybe what you've realized about living here, like whether it be from the people or from the culture, or I think, Americans always love hearing, I think, like foreigners' opinions of Americans, right?
Well,
So like,
I think this is an interesting question, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
So we do not come from DC. So I'm originally from Chicago. Katie is from Arizona, and Amanda is from California. So if you were to ask me this,
maybe we should let you answer first,
No.
so she feels
Okay,
like,
yeah.
wow, the handcuffs are off.
No,
Like,
I mean, honestly, for those people who are listening that are not in the DC metro area, we call this area the Beltway, right?
Yeah.
So Maryland, Virginia, and DC. It is a unique
it is,
culture.
for sure.
And so it is very different from living in Chicago or living in Texas or living in Arizona. So I just want to put that out there.
You're right. You
because-
can't paint Americans with a broad brush.
I guess so. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, I love it.
She's like, you two are having a moment.
I mean, you said it. So I think it has been, and I think there's such a danger. Maybe this happens to any country, right? That we go Americans and we generalize, and completely, as you say, I guess what I've learned is, this is going to sound really obvious, but it's a massive country with a lot of people and hugely diverse and very different cultures, behaviors, habits, I guess, as you say, between different parts of America. Not that I visited, I mean, I'm trying to visit as much as I can, but still plenty of America I haven't even touched. So I think that has been something that has been an eye-opener, actually. I think, and I'm not just saying this to make you all feel really happy, but I think you are, like, to generalize, I think you are amazingly friendly and welcoming. And, when we first moved here, it was just astounding how lovely and friendly the neighbours were, how easy it would be to just be invited around to someone's house, how open people are. Us Brits, we're quite reserved. And you have a moment to be like, oh, I'm really friendly. Oh, what do I do? But I've totally learned from that. And I think when I go back to the UK after this, I feel like I will be a bit more American insofar that I will be, I think, and hope I'll be sort of friendlier.
And they'll be like, what's wrong with you? Oh my gosh. I love that. No, but you do carry. So I lived in South Korea as a civilian for 5 years.
Wow.
And when I came back, I felt like I was different. And I think I remember my sister, even the way I talked. I mean, it was a country that didn't speak English, so I had to tailor my English into a different cadence. And when I came back, I was talking in a slower cadence, and my sister would be like, "What is wrong with you? Why can't you speak?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" But I think you do bring like pieces,
100%.
Especially when you're there
Yeah.
for a significant amount of time.
So I'll be here for 4 years in total.
Oh, wow.
Quite a long time.
Yeah.
I like it though, because any shorter and I think you'd feel a bit like a tourist.
No, that's exactly
Whereas
right.
4 years,
Yeah.
you do choose to psychologically invest in the country
right. Well,
and make
you-
friends
That's right,
and that sort of
yeah.
thing.
I also think you learn. And this is going to be the wrong word. It's going to sound like kind of negative, but the underbelly of the where you are. So
Yeah.
I would say you're there for a year or two. It's kind of the honeymoon phase of wherever you're living, and then you really get to learn how people work and how people act with one another, what the culture is, what it really is like. I don't think you choose to see something different when you're first there.
Yeah.
So
Very true.
So I have a question I've been waiting to ask this whole time,
okay, do it.
which is, so when, as Megan mentioned, we're not from this area, right? So when we tell our family, our friends about what we do, they're like, oh, so you're like James Bond. And so I'm curious for you, what is it like being from the actual origin country of James Bond and like owning that as a piece
Amazing.
of pop culture?
That's an amazing question. And I'd love to say to you that I wake up every morning thinking, wow, I'm from the country that James Bond is from. That it sort of drives me in the decisions I make about my life. Gosh, what does it feel? So, do you know, there are things, right, that are kind of the epitome of Britishness. James Bond, the Queen, who obviously, that was really traumatic actually when she died. But the royal family, aspects of our history, what else? Harry Potter, these sorts of things.
David Beckham.
David Beckham, yeah.
I love that you chose him.
I think that definitely reveals our age, actually. My children don't have a clue who David Beckham. And obviously when you live in the UK, you genuinely just don't even really think about it. It's completely normal. But we will all flock to go and watch the James Bond movie as soon as it comes out, and we'll talk at great length about it, and we are often talking about who's going to be the next James Bond. So it is a big deal. But coming abroad, I suppose I've realised how much others perceive Britain like this. And in a way, I'd like to say, look, Britain is so much more than this, which it is,
Of course.
but then at the same time, it is so wonderful. James Bond is just, somehow that is so brilliantly, wonderfully British. Maybe it was more of a motivator in my career decisions when I left
Subconsciously.
on. Yeah, exactly. And there's something in it that speaks to our psyche a huge amount. I don't know, you'll probably be better at describing that than me.
No, I think that's right. It's funny because I think we always talk about it in the sense of, in many ways, what we're trying to do with this podcast is almost reverse many of the assumptions that people make about the government and about the intelligence community because of sort of the James
Things like
Bond
James Bond.
archetype
Yes, I guess
sort
the
of
sad
media,
reality is
right?
that life is not quite like James Bond.
Yeah.
It's more
But we try quite
paperwork.
hard. This said, I have to say, obviously I work extremely hard in this job, but also you have your moments where you feel a bit James Bond.
That's right.
When you're drinking
Dressed
martinis
in
at the
wedding.
embassy.
Basically,
Yeah, when you're at the G7 or whatever with Barack Obama, I assume that feels pretty James
feels pretty
Bond.
James
yeah.
Bond, yeah. There was a
Amazing.
moment when my taxi didn't turn up to take me to the airport to get on a plane with the Foreign Secretary. And so my husband gallantly said, I will drive you there. But time was ticking. So he had to race across London and race into this private bit of Heathrow Airport. And he felt pretty James Bond that.
That was a nice
As
little
I sort of
taste.
rushed onto this little military
That
plane.
is
It's like,
cute.
so you have your moments.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, this is a great episode.
It really is.
I don't even know how we're going to top this. This is so good.
It really is.
So we talk about one real last question, and then we
Okay.
get to the
Oh my God.
the
to
real
big
hard
stuff.
one.
Yep.
Which is I'm going to prepare you.
Yep.
Which is your
Prepare
code
you
name.
one question in
yeah.
advance.
Yeah, no, that's quite stressful.
Yeah, everyone says it's stressful. But before we get there, we talk a lot about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
And how, small individual choices or, things that you do in life or in your job or in your family kind of have a ripple effect. And so I guess the question is, when do you feel or how do you feel you do this in your role?
It's a great question. And actually, I think you've given me a phrase that I will now use more about what we do in our daily work as diplomats anyway, because sometimes as a diplomat, it feels very intangible what you're doing, and it's quite hard to see the immediate result. And you can feel like quite a small cog in a big wheel. And you send a lot of emails and you don't necessarily sit there every day thinking or feeling like you're changing the world. But I think your question sort of makes me realize that these little things that we do day on day do genuinely all contribute to a bigger picture and hopefully a safer picture, I suppose, more prosperous picture, etc. So you've helped me think that actually it's a good way of describing what we
you
do. I was trying to and thinking about what sort of examples I would give you. There were a couple, but I think they are actually a bit too sensitive to say, funnily enough. But just moments where I think the exciting part about diplomacy is kind of that lesson I learned when I was a yak, actually, and watching that Sherpa is how human things are, but also these moments where you genuinely do have agency. Because sometimes you think it's all just the system and the institution. And I really think I've learned, and I relearn, and I relearned again recently, that actually humans who act, who make good decisions, who intervene at certain moments can genuinely just sort of spin a dial in a slightly different way. This is me totally not answering your question, actually, am I? But
No, I love the way
this
you're
is a
answering
great
it.
yeah.
So I think it has reminded me that actually you have those moments as a diplomat where it may feel small, but one does do that. But it is hard to give completely concrete examples. But I suppose probably for me, there have been some link to Ukraine. And I'm not saying, Ukraine is still in a really difficult place. But certain actions, and I'm far from the front line, it's very different, but certain actions one might do that just contribute to that little bit that helps make the situation that little bit better.
I don't think you realize how much that answer resonates with us. Just the word agency
100%.
and you being a small cog in a big wheel, you still do have power. You have, and not in the big sense of the word,
No.
So
Yeah, I think we resign ourselves to bureaucracy all the time.
Yeah.
And I think convince ourselves that we don't have power when in reality we do.
Yeah.
Even if it is small, right? Like even if you're one of, how many people live in the United States? 300 million
350,
people
yeah.
that live in a country. Like even you just casting your vote matters. Like even if you're one analyst who's just got out of college and you're sitting in your cubicle in the dark in your skiff, like drinking your burnt coffee, writing a report, and it feels like I'm just this cog in this huge machine that would continue to turn without me. It doesn't matter. Like you still in that moment hold that space.
Completely.
And I think when we take ownership over that space and do actually recognize that we have agency, like there are amazing things that can happen, even if they're small.
Yeah.
And those things grow and they change
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
And particularly when we all in a community together see ourselves that way, like it's pretty powerful to think about it that way.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And it's something I'm trying to help everyone in my team see and feel about themselves as well. But what I would add to that, and I think I've learned this since being here from a particularly brilliant diplomat who used to be my boss here, sometimes just add a bit of tenacity to that as well. because everyone has great ideas, but it's all too easy to sort of just somehow think that no one's going to do anything with it or it's not worth it. But God, a little bit of tenacity and just pushing it forward or picking up the phone to that person, just going for it.
Yeah.
That
like
can
if you
really
get
extend your agency.
That's right. If you get a no, that's not a no.
Yeah.
Just go to the next
person.
Exactly.
Figure out when you're going to get a yes.
Exactly.
We
That's
definitely
right.
live our lives that way.
We do. That's right. I mean, we always say it's the same thing with building a company. Like even when it's you're creating the system, like the idea is 1% of what you need. Like the other 99% is what you're doing every day, like the way that you execute, the way that when you hit a barrier, you just don't stop but keep going. You like look for that other avenue. Like those are things that all of us have to do, whether you're in a 20,000 person bureaucracy or if you're 2
Small
co-founders
team.
of a company. Yeah, exactly. So I think we've come to the final and our favorite question, which is in keeping with the name of our podcast, Iron Butterfly, which was named after the first female chief of station at CIA. If you had to give yourself a code name, what would it be and why?
Okay. I don't know if everyone's just going to burst into laughter.
No, we love this. We get so excited.
I was toying between 2, but I think I'm on steel bubbles.
I love it.
The visual is so good.
No, and you have to explain why, and I'll tell you the first thing I thought of.
Okay.
Before or
it's
after?
not that yeah, okay. So steel, which I realise is not just a play on that. So steel is because the guy who is currently, this might have changed by the time this airs, but is currently the head of our MI6, who's known as C. He once wrote, and this is not because I'm a spy, I promise, he once wrote in my end of year review that I had inner steel.
Oh.
And I like that. I know. So that's where the steel.
A really high compliment.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. That's the tenacity. You're like, what? But it's in better words.
But then to match that, the bubbles. Just because I love champagne.
Oh, I love it. I love
That's
it.
amazing.
That is a really good code name. That's a good one.
It is. Okay, something amazing happens. You're celebrating something. What type of champagne are you drinking?
Ooh, I'm now going to sell British sparkling wine, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, so with no offence to our French neighbours, but actually British sparkling wine has been beating champagne in competitions recently. And with the kind of climate changing, and our soil, of course, is pretty much the same as the sort of French Champagne region, we've actually got a growing, it has to be called sparkling wine, because it's not
a champagne.
Right.
Yeah.
that we've got this amazing growing sparkling wine industry. So there is some completely delicious British sparkling wine.
Wow.
So you'll have to, I should have
More
brought
you know.
you some. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That is really good to know.
That's what we will be toasting with the next time we do a champagne toast.
No, when like a big, I don't know, something big. We get 10,000 followers or something.
I like
and
that.
we'll toast to you.
Wow. Okay, so everyone, follow us if you want to see us drink some British sparkling wine.
Yeah, I love it.
Amazing. Well, Lucy, thank you so much. This has been so fun. It's been so great to get to know you. Your story is amazing. Your reflections, I'll be thinking about for months. So just thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us. We've had a ton of fun.
A real pleasure. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
This has been an episode of Iron Butterfly Podcast. To learn more about Iron Butterfly Media, visit our website at www.ironbutterflymedia.com. If you like the show, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and follow Iron Butterfly on social media for bonus content. You can also support us on Patreon. Lastly, we want to thank our producer, Amanda Young, and the entire Iron Butterfly team. Stay fierce, and we'll talk next time.